From garage thrashers to the biggest heavy metal band in the world, Metallica has certainly made its mark and has gone on to be one of the biggest and most influential heavy metal bands in history. With over 125 albums sold worldwide, the Rock Hall of Fame, and them still touring stadiums to this day, Metallica has proven themselves to be an unstoppable force. Sure, Metallica has had its low points, but somehow they always manage to get back up on their feet and make things right. This is the history of Metallica, from garage to global. But before we begin, just know that this is based off of my understanding and on my research. There's a chance that some of this information will be slightly off, and if that's the case, go ahead and let me know and I'll do my best to acknowledge it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get to the real deal, I think it's important that we go back to 1981, when a Danish drummer Lars Ulrich moved to Los Angeles and placed an ad on the Recycler newspaper. A man named James Hetfield answered the ad. Ulrich and Hetfield didn't click instantly, but Lars' ambition, which was to get them on a Metal Blade Records compilation, convinced Hetfield to join forces with them. Now, around the same time, a friend of his, Ron Quintana, who ran a fanzine, was brainstorming names for a heavy metal magazine. He came up with two names he liked, Metallica and Metal Mania. Ron asked Lars which one he thought was better for the magazine, and Lars, seeing an opportunity, said something around the lines of, "You should take the name Metal Mania, it's so much cooler." So that, of course, Lars could take the name Metallica for his own band. Luckily, Quintana didn't hold a grudge and just shrugged it off. As for the other two band members, after Lars and James started rehearsing, Lars decided to make Ron McGovney the bassist since he was his childhood friend. But finding a lead guitarist was trickier. The two would put the word out and eventually connected with the guitarist Dave Mustaine, a young guitarist from LA who was already known in local metal circles for his shredding skills. Metallica would go on to play their first gigs in 1982, opening for local bands in LA clubs. This would build them a reputation for being faster and heavier than everyone else around. In July of 1982, at the Chateau East studio in Tucson, California, Metallica would go on to record their demo, No Life Till Leather, which would feature the tracks Hit the Lights, The Mechanics, Motor Breath, Seek and Destroy, Metal Militia, Jump in the Fire, and Phantom Lord. This demo would circulate heavily in the tape trading ground in the metal scene, and it made waves across the US and even Europe. This is how Metallica would catch the attention of Johnny Zazula, a record store owner on the East Coast who later became their manager and launched Megaforce Records. But eventually Turmoil would form in the band. You see, James Hetfield and Ron McGovney weren't exactly the best of friends. James felt as though Ron acted immature, and Ron saw James as too intense. So Ron McGovney ultimately decided to leave the band, and for the most part he never really spoke about him again. But Ron wasn't the only one to have issues between the band members. Dave Mustaine's drinking and violent temper caused tension in the band, and he often got into fights and clashed with Hetfield and Ulrich. So right before recording their debut album, the band fired Dave Mustaine due to his substance abuse and behavior. But luckily for Dave, he went on to create the iconic band Megadeth, which would be known as one of the big four thrash metal bands. So Dave decided to forget about Metallica and leave it all in the past. I wish. Finally, we can get to the good part where Metallica saw Cliff Burton perform live with his band Trauma at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. Metallica was very impressed with his bass playing, so they asked him if he could join the band. Cliff Burton said yes, but only on one condition: you must relocate from Los Angeles to the Bay Area. And of course, easier said than done, the band moved and Burton officially became Metallica's bassist in December of 1982, replacing Ron McGovney. Of course, Metallica is still down one lead guitarist, so they decided to look at the lead guitarist of a band named Exodus. Metallica invited Kirk Hammett to an audition for Metallica, and immediately the band members were impressed.
Alright, we're gonna turn it over now to the newest member, Mr. Kirk Hammett. He's gonna melt your face with his guitar.
So Kirk Hammett had officially joined the band in April of 1983, just before the Kill 'Em All recording sessions. Kirk Hammett's more disciplined playing style had stabilized the band. July 25th of 1983, Metallica would finally release their debut album Kill 'Em All through Megaforce Records. It was originally going to be titled
Metal Up Your Ass!
But the label rejected it, so Kill 'Em All was chosen instead. Songs like Whiplash, Seek and Destroy, and Hit the Lights established the blueprint for thrash metal. This album didn't sell huge numbers at first, but it built Metallica's reputation as pioneers of a new, heavier, and faster form of metal. But this was only the beginning. After the release of their debut album Kill 'Em All, Metallica had gained underground fame, but wanted to expand musically. So while touring extensively, they were exposed to new ideas and technical challenges, which inspired more complex songwriting. They began to experiment with longer song structures and harmonizing guitar solos, and more diverse lyrical themes, not just rebellion and thrash aggression. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich wrote most of the lyrics and drum patterns, but the whole band contributed to the songwriting, including one of the previous members, Dave Mustaine. Metallica had credited him for writing some of the riffs in the songs Ride the Lightning and Call of Cthulhu. It's all kind of confusing. I think he wrote it before he left Metallica. Honestly, I don't know. So the themes of the songs began to expand dramatically, with For Whom the Bell Tolls being about war, based on Hemingway's novel, Fade to Black being about suicidal thoughts and despair, and Creeping Death, which is a religious storytelling about the plague in Egypt. Creeping Death became a live staple. It would often be the first track played in live performances. The album reflected the band maturing both musically and thematically, and it wasn't just about speed anymore. Ride the Lightning would be released July 26 in 1984 on Megaforce Records in the USA, and also Music for Nations in Europe. Critics praised this album for its maturity, complexity, and depth. This would be the album that established Metallica as more than just a thrash metal band. They were composers who could blend speed, melody, and emotion. At release it sold moderately, but it gained momentum through relentless touring and word of mouth in the metal underground. After the release of Ride the Lightning, Metallica was growing both in skill and ambition. They have been touring extensively and have even been opening for the famous Ozzy Osbourne, which exposed them to even larger audiences. But the band wanted their next album to be even heavier, more complex, and lyrically darker. They wanted to reflect on social issues, addiction, and personal struggles. Bassist Cliff Burton had become a major creative force, bringing classical music influences and innovative bass techniques such as using distortion and the wah pedal. James Hetfield began to explore more lyrical themes in the songs Master of Puppets, which was about addiction and control, Disposable Heroes, which was about war and its consequences, and Welcome Home, or Sanitarium as we all call it, which is about mental anguish. The band really pushed boundaries with their complex time signatures, extended instrumental sections, and multi-layered guitar harmonies from Hetfield and Hammett. The album was recorded at Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen with Flemming Rasmussen, and the band experimented with layered guitars, dynamic shifts, and intricate arrangements. Burton's bass was mixed prominently, a first for Metallica, emphasizing its melodic, harmonic role rather than just rhythm alone. James Hetfield and Ulrich perfected the tight, aggressive, yet clear production that made a defining sound for the world of thrash metal. Master of Puppets would be released March 3rd of 1986 by Elektra Records, and would go on to be the first Metallica album to enter the Billboard 200, eventually peaking at number 29. This album would be hailed as a landmark in thrash metal, and would be known as one of the greatest thrash metal albums of all time. Fans and critics praised the combination of technical skill, melody, and aggressive energy that this album had. But unfortunately, September 27th of 1986, things would take a dark turn. The band's European tour was on full swing, promoting Master of Puppets. Metallica felt as though they were at the top of the world, seemed as though they were unstoppable, until tragedy struck. Metallica's bassist Cliff Burton died in a bus accident in Sweden in the year 1986 while they were on tour. His death shocked the band and the metal community. He was only 24 years old. Burton's funeral was attended by bandmates, friends, and fans, cementing his legacy as a metal pioneer. This would begin to raise the question, is it over for Metallica? The band was devastated. They even considered breaking up, but Lars Ulrich said, "We could have said F this, we're done." But Cliff would have been pissed off if we quit. Cliff wasn't just the bassist, he was the musical anchor and the spiritual guide. He brought theory, melody, and even a sense of philosophy into the band. Losing him meant losing both a friend and a core creative force. James Hetfield in particular had struggled a lot. Ever since he met Cliff, they had been close friends, but still the band decided to carry on Cliff's honor. So Metallica began to hold auditions for a new bassist. Dozens tried out, but Jason Newsted from Arizona's thrash metal band Flotsam and Jetsam stood out the most of the band members. Jason came prepared. He already knew much of Metallica's catalog, down to the details of Hetfield and Burton's riffs. The band famously asked him to learn Master of Puppets on the spot, and he nailed it. Jason was humble, hardworking, and a super fan of Metallica himself. He brought boundless enthusiasm. Lars once described him as the most Metallica fan you could ever find. But Jason also faced hazing and isolation. The band, still grieving over Cliff's death, unfairly treated him as the new guy, keeping him at arm's length emotionally. But despite this, Jason Newsted remained loyal and powered through, and also quickly proved himself on stage. Metallica then began working on a new album under the name And Justice for All. It was recorded from January to May in 1988 at the One on One Studios in Los Angeles with producer Flemming Rasmussen once again. Jason played the bass on this album, but his parts were infamously buried in the mix. The decision came from Hetfield and Ulrich, who were still coping on Cliff's absence, and they were resistant to fully accepting Jason's presence. So they deliberately kept the bass almost inaudible, making the record sound very dry and the guitar or the drum sound heavy. Jason would later admit that the experience was heartbreaking, but nonetheless he stayed loyal and committed to the band. Man, Jason Newsted was the nicest guy, and the way that James and Lars treated Jason has dubbed them Unforgiven. I'm sorry, that was horrible. Okay, I'll stop. As for the album And Justice for All, songs are very long, technical, and progressive, and lyrics tackled many political and social issues. Blackened was about environmental destruction, and Justice for All was about corruption and injustice in legal systems, and One was about a soldier trapped in his own body, inspired by Johnny Got His Gun. Musically, the album leaned into complexity, odd time signatures, and intricate riffs, but many criticized the production as being thin and cold. But regardless of the criticism, the album was released September 7th, the year 1988. Despite the controversial mix, it was a commercial success, reaching number 6 on the Billboard 200, their highest chart position of all time, and One would also become Metallica's first music video, a haunting black and white piece featuring clips from the film Johnny Got His Gun. The video was a breakthrough, earning heavy rotation in MTV and introducing Metallica to mainstream audiences without compromising their intensity. Critics had also praised the ambition and the lyrical depth, though some felt as though the production made it less powerful than it could have been. The And Justice for All tour, or the Damage Justice tour, made Metallica one of the biggest live bands on earth, playing in arenas for the first time. Jason quickly proved himself as a live powerhouse, winning over fans despite the band's mistreatment of him. And the success of One put Metallica on the mainstream radar. Emotionally, however, Cliff's shadow still loomed large, and the buried bass was symbolic in a way. Cliff's absence was too painful, and Jason was never truly allowed to fill in that role in the studio. After the release of And Justice for All and the massive Damage Justice tour, Metallica had climbed to the top of the thrash metal world. But the band was burnt out. They admitted that the songs were getting too long, too complex, and too exhausting to play live. James Hetfield said that they wanted to simplify, which meant tighter songs, more groove, and more of a focus on songwriting instead of sheer complexity. They also realized that MTV and radio exposure from One could push them even farther if they crafted songs that were heavy but accessible. So that's when Bob Rock came in. Bob Rock has got to be the craziest name for a producer known to work on the production of rock music. Bob Rock had pushed Metallica even harder than anybody had ever before, making them record together live in the studio to capture energy, demanding multiple takes and encouraging experimentation. The band initially clashed with him. They hated his perfectionism and the long hours, but the results are absolutely undeniable. Jason Newsted had also got proper treatment. His bass tone was thick and audible, unlike the Injustice for All album. Recording stretched nearly a year at One-on-One Studios in Los Angeles, costing over $1 million, which was a fortune at the time. The American dollars are worth a lot more back then. The album released August 12th, the year 1991, through Elektra Records. The album was self-titled, but universally people began to call it the Black Album because of its minimalistic black cover with the barely visible Metallica logo and the snake. Musically, it had more tempos, more groove-written riffs, clearer vocals, and shorter songs. Tracks that stood out on this album were Enter Sandman, with nightmare-inspired lyrics, a crushing riff, and even became their stadium anthem. There's also The Unforgiven, with an emotional, powerful ballad with heavy choruses. Nothing Else Matters, which was Hetfield's deeply personal ballad, originally being written just for himself but became a crossover hit. Sad But True, a downtime riff monster, and Wherever I May Roam, which came with Eastern influences and lyrics about life on the road. The mix of heaviness and accessibility made the album an absolute game changer. The Black Album was an immediate commercial smash, debuting at number 1 in 10 countries and eventually number 1 in 15 countries. The album would stay on the Billboard 200 for over 500 weeks and would go on to sell over 30 million copies worldwide, 16 million in the US alone, making it one of the best-selling albums of all time. Critics praised this album for songwriting and production, though some hardcore thrash fans accused Metallica of selling out. Singles also dominated the radio and MTV, and Enter Sandman even became a cultural phenomenon. The Wherever We May Roam and the Nowhere Else to Roam tours, which took place 1991 through 1993, were monumental. They would go on to play over 300 shows across 3 years, with massive stadiums and festivals around the world, and even famously opened for Guns N' Roses in 1992 on a chaotic co-headline tour that included riots and James Hetfield's pyrotech accident, which gave him severe burns on his arm during the song Fade to Black. It's also worth mentioning the Monsters in Moscow show, which was one of the most insane performances of all time. Metallica and many other bands would perform to 1.5 million people on an airfield in Moscow. I mean, you've got to see it for yourself. But Metallica has gone from headlining theaters and arenas to becoming one of the biggest live draws in rock. Of course, with this new slower style of music, there came many controversies. Some old school fans felt betrayed by the simpler songs, ballades, and radio-friendly sound. Yet the band insisted that they weren't selling out and they were growing. Hetfield once said, "If you start writing for everyone else, you're already lost." So despite the criticism, the album introduced millions of new fans to heavy metal. The band also began to have a sort of image shift, and they got shorter haircuts, wore all black clothing, and had a much more serious stage presence. This album had cemented Metallica as the biggest heavy metal band in the world, and it brought Metallica into the mainstream without losing intensity. And songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters, and also Sad But True remained staples, being played at sports arenas, commercials, and even political rallies. This era essentially set Metallica on a new level, not just thrash pioneers, but global rock stars. After the Endless Black Album tour, which is 1991 through 1993, Metallica was exhausted, but also at their absolute peak of fame. They didn't want to repeat themselves. Thrash was behind them, and even the heavy groove of the Black Album felt like old ground. The band members were also changing personally. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich were settling into family lives, and the band started listening to more alternative rock, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, etc., which would seep into their songwriting, and they would then go on to release their sixth album, Load. Load would go on to release June 4th of the year 1996, 5 years after the Black Album. The musical style had bluesy, southern rock influences, groove metal, and alternative rock. The production was modern and layered with experimentation. Notable tracks in this album were Until It Sleeps, which was influenced by Hetfield's anger at cancer, which had killed his mother. This song became a huge MTV hit. King Nothing, which was a groove-driven anthem, often compared to Enter Sandman, and also Hero of the Day, which was an almost alternative rock ballad. This album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Huge sales, but many bands were shocked by the softer sound the band had developed. This album would go on to be their most controversial album yet. One of those controversies was even the album cover. The Load album featured a photograph by Andres Serrano called Semen and Blood 3. Yeah, I can't be the only one just figuring this out now, right? I will never be able to see the Load album cover the same again. But anyway, moving on. But yes guys, it's exactly as it sounds. The photograph was literally a mix of bodily fluids on plexiglass, and the fans are outraged by it. But something apparently even more controversial for whatever reason was the haircuts. In 1996, Metallica appeared with shorter hair, eyeliner, and slick clothing. For fans who idolize their metal warrior image, this is unforgivable. Lars Ulrich would later defend their look, saying that we were in our 30s and we didn't want to look like the same pimply-faced kids from the 80s. Metallica would continue down their path of experimentation, or to begin to drag more controversy with their album Reload. The album was released November 18th of 1996. It was written and recorded during the Load sessions, but it was split into 2 albums. They continued with the experimental direction with songs like Fuel, a fast-paced rocker song that became a live staple, The Unforgiven 2, which was a sequel to the Black Album hit, and The Memory Remains, featuring Marianne Faithfull on haunting backing vocals. This album would also debut at number 1, but sold less over time. Critics would find it to be less inspiring than Load, and many longtime fans accused Metallica of once again selling out and abandoning metal altogether. They were also comparing it to alternative rock bands of the time, which clashed with their thrash metal legacy. James Hetfield would later admit that this period of them was experimenting and trying to shed the skin of the thrash past. But regardless of the controversies, these albums sold millions and brought in new fans who discovered Metallica through MTV and radio. But not all the releases at this time were controversial. November 24th of 1998, Metallica released a double album of covers under the name Garage Inc. It paid a homage to their roots with songs by Diamond Head, Misfits, Thin Lizzy, Black Sabbath, etc. The featured hit Whiskey in the Jar, which was a Thin Lizzy / Irish traditional cover, won a Grammy, and this album was praised for being fun, energetic, and showing Metallica's influences. In the year 1999, Metallica would record a live album with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Michael Kamen. They performed Metallica's classics, with orchestral arrangements, plus 2 new songs, No Leaf Clover and Human. No Leaf Clover became a radio hit, and the fans and critics alike were all around impressed. This was one of Metallica's most creative and ambitious projects. The concert showcased Metallica's willingness to push boundaries, proving that they weren't afraid to experiment. Commercially in this era, they were successful. Load and Reload sold millions and debuted at number 1. And while many fans see this as their sellout period, others view it as a bold and brave reinvention. This era showed Metallica was more than just a thrash metal band, and they could adapt and remain relevant through changing musical landscapes. The backlash, however, planted seeds of division with the fanbase that still lingers to this day. So the band was under quite a lot of controversy. A lot of fans have felt betrayed after the release of these past few albums, but things were about to get a whole lot worse. In the early 2000s, Metallica discovered an unreleased demo of I Disappear from the Mission Impossible soundtrack circulating on Napster, which is the file sharing service. Metallica sued Napster for infringement, which would go on to be a landmark case in music history. The band also presented the names of the 335 users who had illegally downloaded the Metallica tracks as well, demanding that they be banned off the platform. This had brought in a huge backlash from fans, and they began to see Metallica as greedy rock stars attacking their own supporters. Lars Ulrich in particular became a villain figure in the media, and though Metallica was technically right, the PR damage was enormous, branding them as sellouts once again, and it's also worth mentioning that after the lawsuit, Napster was banned. But just as you thought things couldn't get any worse, bassist Jason Newsted decided to leave Metallica in January of 2001. Jason at first stated that it was for private and personal reasons, but later revealed that he felt creatively stifled, mainly because the band wasn't allowing him to pursue side projects like his band called Echo Brain. He also stated that years of hazing and being treated as the new guy took a toll, along with James Hetfield's controlling nature, which made Jason feel trapped. His departure was a huge blow. Jason had been the band's workhorse and fan ambassador. Soon after Jason Newsted left, James Hetfield entered rehab for alcoholism and other addictions. This was a turning point. Hetfield had long buried his emotions in drinking, anger, and control issues. Without Hetfield, Metallica was at a standstill. Ulrich and Hammett weren't sure if the band would even survive. During this time, Metallica had hired a performance coach, Phil Tolley, to help them work through their issues. This process was filmed and later released as the documentary Some Kind of Monster in the year 2004. The film revealed ugly fights between Hetfield and Ulrich, deep resentment about Cliff's death, Jason's treatment, and creative control, as well as Hetfield's struggles with balancing family life and band life.
I gotta tell you, dude, it's pretty difficult to respect a 4 o'clock thing when you show up at 12:25 and he shows up at 12:35. It starts right there, okay? And it's sort of, I don't know, it just becomes difficult, you know, when it's not a two-way thing. You know, you didn't apologize when you came in. You didn't say anything. You just came, you showed up at 12:25. You said, hey, sorry, I'm late.
Yeah, that's so funny coming from you.
You know,
It really is.
that you guys have a long list of issues that you guys need to go through. It seems to me like there's a lot of history that you guys need to work out.
You know, I almost feel like a science project right now. You know, it's like I walk out of here and I feel it, you know, oh, so how did it go today with, you know, the project, the guy, you know. I don't like that.
Who's saying that?
I don't know. I'm assuming, and that's another thing that's not good to do. No one's saying that, but I don't know. I get that. I guess that's a fear of mine.
Yeah, I just think it's so fucking self-absorbed and so selfish. And the things that I struggle with on that is this complete lack of not only respecting other points of view, sacrificing your own needs for other ways, but also kind of a complete lack of caring about other points of view or caring about what I feel or anybody else in this room feels or all that type of stuff.
It just comes down to effort and what you know, what you're willing to do. Like put in that same effort, the same effort that you're putting into your sobriety and your family and your wife has to be put into Metallica. I'm more important than Metallica. Well, of course you are. And I'm tired of the other way around happening, that's all.
Why does it have to be either or? Is that the only two options? Is it either Metallica is number one and then everything else is fucked, or I and my family number one and then everything else gets fucked? Is that the only two options that are left? My family's more important to me than this fucking band, okay? But it doesn't mean I'm not ready to put in 8 12-hour days if that's what it takes right now.
See, that's contradicting to me.
Okay.
Because when you sit here for 8 hours and don't go home, I think, well, he doesn't give a shit about his family, you know, and that's none of my business.
What?
So I need to hear that stuff from you too.
I never feel I get closer to seeing anything clearer.
And
I don't know where this is going. I just wish I had some clarity in my life.
Right.
Okay, it's been a year and a half of fog, so it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. It's been a fucking year and a half of this, and it just doesn't seem like we're getting far.
You just spend time on the road and you don't really become friends. When you become friends at a certain point, but I always put so much work in it, you know, really hard for me to actually believe that I can like as my friend.
You're just sitting here being a complete dick.
You're really helping matters. You're really good at that. I was straight up with you and I told you I'm in a shit mood, and what have you been doing? Fucking picking at me all night.
Come on, guys. We've got better things to do.
Yeah, I do.
Instead of projecting the image of unstoppable rock gods, Metallica appeared as vulnerable, dysfunctional, and human. This shocked the rock fans but also made them relatable. After Hetfield returned from rehab, Metallica regrouped with Bob Rock, and Bob Rock would temporarily fill in on bass. They recorded the album Saint Anger and released it June 5th of the year 2003. This album had no guitar solos, sludgy, tuned down riffs, and of course the infamous quote-unquote trash can sounding snare drum sound. Themes consisted of Hetfield's anger, recovery, and growing emotions all poured into the lyrics. So how did the fans feel about this album? Some praised its honesty and rawness, while others mocked the production, especially the drums. Metallica fans were divided on this album. Many hated it, but also some respected its raw power. Commercially, it debuted at #1 in 30 countries, showing that Metallica still commanded huge attention despite backlash. Even though Saint Anger was controversial, it marked Hetfield's return and the band's survival after they nearly collapsed. Metallica launched the Madly in Anger with the World Tour with the new bassist Robert Trujillo. Robert used to work for bands such as Suicidal Tendencies, Infectious Grooves, and even worked for Ozzy Osbourne. Trujillo brought fresh energy and stage presence, revitalizing the band. The Some Kind of Monster film and this turbulent era might have been controversial, but ultimately it made Metallica more human and relatable. They weren't untouchable gods anymore. They were flawed men rebuilding. And this may have been Metallica's lowest point in their career, but it also became the foundation for their second golden era. By 2006, they were headlining Download Festival and other massive shows, proving their live dominance was still intact. Meanwhile, Hetfield had embraced sobriety, and the band was stronger personally than they had been in years. Soon Metallica would begin work on a new album titled Death Magnetic. This album was produced by Rick Rubin, and would go on to release September 12th, the year 2008. This album was a deliberate return to their thrash-inspired roots. It included long, complex songs with multiple riffs, much like their 1980s material. Guitar solos also returned in full force, and lyrics tackled morality, struggle, and redemption. Notable tracks in this album were tracks such as The Day That Never Comes, a song that is reminiscent of One, with a clean intro and explosive ending, as well as All Nightmare Long, which was a fast-paced, aggressive thrash banger, and then also Cyanide, which is a modern groove with classic heaviness. Critics would go on to praise this album as their best album since Injustice for All. Fans absolutely loved the return to speed, aggression, and solos, and there were a few controversies though. Common criticism fans had with this album was the over-compressed sound and distorted mix, but nonetheless the energy was undeniable. I also can't forget the unforgettable moment in history when the Big Four, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax performed together on stage for the first time in history. Metallica invited Dave Mustaine on stage for a jam session, healing one of metal's oldest feuds. This cemented Metallica's thrash's elder statesmen, uniting the scene they helped create. Metallica would even go on to release a unique concert film with a fictional narrative about a roadie named Dane DeHaan running through a dystopian city while Metallica plays live. It was released on IMAX 3D. It was ambitious, visually striking, but commercially underwhelming. But this film helped showcase the band's willingness to experiment creatively outside of just albums. Metallica focused heavily on live performances, 2010 through 2015, becoming one of the top grossing touring bands in the world. They also launched the Orion Music and More Festival, curating their own event with diverse lineups 2012 through 2013. And even without constant new albums, they remain metal's biggest live act, pulling stadium crowds worldwide. November 18, 2016, Metallica would release their first studio album in 8 years titled Hardwired to Self-Destruct. This album was a balance between thrash roots and modern heaviness. Aggressive tracks like Hardwired recall early Metallica speed. Mid-tempo anthems like Atlas Rise and Moth in a Flame highlight big riffs and soaring choruses. Dark, sprawling epics like Spit Out the Bone would show their progressive side. Fans and critics appreciated its old mix of thrash and modern production, and it would debut at #1 in 57 countries. The release of this album would also be followed up by their Worldwide tour. It would go from 2016 to the year 2019 and even became the highest grossing tour of the decade, earning over $400 million. This tour showed everyone Metallica's ability to fill stadiums all around the globe. They embraced fan interactivity with things like Metallica by Request tours, where set lists are voted on by fans, frequent charity work through the All Within My Hands Foundation, which supported hunger relief, education, and disaster relief. In the year 2019, Metallica would celebrate the 20th anniversary of their symphony orchestra collaboration S&M 1999 by reuniting with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. It was recorded at the brand new Chase Center in San Francisco and would expand on the concept of symphonic renditions of classics and modern songs like Moth in the Flame. This album showed their versatility and willingness to push beyond metal. April 14th, 2023, Metallica released their album 72 Seasons. The title 72 Seasons represented the first 18 years of life and how they shape you. Musically, this album was heavy, riff-driven, with nods to their thrash roots while embracing maturity. Critics noted its consistency and raw energy, and fans saw it as proof that Metallica can still deliver fresh material even after 4 whole decades. Metallica is now widely recognized as the biggest metal band of all time, with over 125 million copies sold. They are also known for being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, and as a band that transcended metal, becoming a cultural force in music history. If it wasn't for Metallica, thrash metal would have looked very different, and countless bands from Pantera to Avenged Sevenfold and to Gojira cite them as an influence. And despite controversies such as Napster, Load, and Reload, and also Saint Anger, Metallica's ability to evolve, stumble, and recover is part of why their legacy is so compelling. To this day, Metallica balances being icons and still being active artists. They are a multi-generational band. Parents who grew up with them now take their kids to Metallica concerts, and unlike many peers, they've avoided breaking up, reuniting, or relying solely on nostalgia. Their modern identity, they're survivors, innovators, and legends who prove heavy music could conquer the mainstream without losing credibility. From their chaotic beginnings in Los Angeles garages, through the fury of Kill 'Em All, and the epic rise of Master of Puppets, Metallica has carved their place as the kings of thrash, conquering the world with the Black Album, redefining what heavy metal music could mean to the mainstream. Of course, they had their lows: experimentation, backlash, lawsuits, addiction, and many times a near collapse. There were many points in time when it seemed as though Metallica's own demons might destroy them. But regardless of their troubles, they somehow managed to push through. Jason Newsted's departure, Hetfield's rehab, and the chaos of Saint Anger forced the band to rebuild from the ground up. And rebuilding is exactly what they did. With Robert Trujillo on bass, Death Magnetic reignited their thrash fire. The Big Four united a generation of metal. Metallica reclaimed their throne. In the modern era, hardwired to self-destruct in 72 Seasons proved that even after 4 decades, Metallica still got it. And today, Metallica stands not just as a band, but as a living institution. They've sold over 125 million albums, filled stadiums to the brim all around the world, and inspired countless musicians across genres. From the garage to the Hall of Fame, from the tragedy to triumph, Metallica's story is one of survival, reinvention, and pure unrelenting metal. And as long as those opening notes of Seek and Destroy, Master of Puppets, or Enter Sandman echo through an arena, the legacy of Metallica lives on, reminding us all that metal can be bigger than life itself.
Where's Ride the Lightning? Where's Ride the Lightning?
It's not on.
Why is it on the list?
No, it's not voted for.
Why?
Because these people have said.
Who didn't vote for Ride the Lightning? Tell me right
All
now.
those people out there.
I want you to go out there and ask them fucking why. One day I want to fucking play it.